Hello, everyone. I'm Jim Garrison, and I want to welcome you to this session of Humanity Rising. We're at day 3 of a 10-day program as we track the events in Sharm el-Sheikh in Egypt around the 27th Conference of Parties, in which the governments of the world are once again coming together to discuss climate change. We know from past experience that this is what Greta Thurnberg calls blah, blah, blah. And so we are emphasizing in our program what we as the human community, we as the people of the world now can and must do in a situation in which, as the Secretary General Antonio Guterres has said, we're now in code red. We are now looking, as he said 2 days ago in Sharm el-Sheikh, in the face of climate hell. And so we have brought together people who we hope to hear from directly in Sharm el-Sheikh. We are partnered with Facing Future TV. We had some technical challenges yesterday, so we're still working on that in the background. And we've also been partnering with Oz Green in Australia, an NGO that has been, for the last number of decades, been working to empower young people around the world to take climate action and actions across an array of domains to improve not only the ecology, but humanity's relationship with the ecology, which is key to any kind of solution that we seek. Before we dive in, I just want to make a note about the US elections yesterday. For those of you who have been following it, you know that we did not see a Republican landslide as was widely predicted. It turned out that the American people were far more sagacious than expected, and generally, with a few exceptions, rejected the extremism of the election deniers and the climate deniers, and also voted overwhelmingly against further restrictions on abortion. So it looks like the people of America, once again, as they did in 2020, have made the kind of decisions that have preserved democracy against the onslaughts of Donald Trump and the extreme right to suppress the democratic institutions, to suppress the vote. So that's good news, and is an example of what can happen when people are given the freedom to do something as simple, but also as fundamental as voting. And I raise this because that is an example of what all of us need to take in relationship to climate. It's the small actions, whether it's vote by vote or climate action by climate action, that really, at this critical moment in human history, is the imperative that all of us need to recognize that every choice matters. Every action matters, as do the non-actions and the non-choices. We're no longer bystanders. All of us in a situation of code red are involved and need to understand that day by day, choice by choice. So I would like to introduce Sue Lennox back again. She's the co-founder of Oz Green. She's the one who's put all these extraordinary young people together through youth changing the world. And so Sue, who's in Australia, it's 2 o'clock in the morning. I want to welcome you, and Sue's going to say a few words and tee up the young people who are going to be sharing with us what they're doing. Welcome, Sue.
Good morning. How are you going, Jim?
All right. It's a good day.
It's a good day. I wouldn't be anywhere else. After meeting the wonderful crew from Sierra Leone yesterday, we're going to today look at a journey that a young man has taken from Bendigo in Victoria in Australia to New York. And I'd like to introduce you to Nick Allardyce. We first met Nick in 2003 when he participated in the Youth Lead program at that time. And I just really love, one of the things that he said to me is, you know, I used to be too cool for school. And what happened through his involvement with Osgreen is just getting crystal clarity around what it is that he's most concerned about and what it is that he's going to do about that in creating peace and harmony in the world through his life. And Nick now joins us via a pre-recorded video as the CEO of change.org in New York. And I'll come back at the end of this and speak a little bit more about that journey. Over to you, Georg.
Oh my God. When I think back to when I was a teenager, I was someone who cared a lot, talked a big talk, but really didn't follow through. I was all talk and no action. And I knew that I cared vaguely about the world, but hadn't really crystallized that into a set of clear, strong principles that I knew I could use to guide my decision making. And thank God I found Osgreen when I was in that moment. Over the course of this incredibly transformative workshop and weekend, I not only clarified my values and kind of decided what I really wanted to stand for as a human, but also really committed myself not just to the talk but to the action. And it's been a wild ride since then. I think in the immediate aftermath of that workshop, the thing that was concerning me most was apathy, civic engagement. It really concerned me how few young people were getting involved in making the world a better place. And so I organized a forum with a friend, brought together 100 young people in my local area, tried to equip them with skills, resources, connect them to local organizations. And that was the start in many ways of my activism, organizing and civic leadership journey. Over the following years, I started working for an incredible youth movement organization called Oak Tree, running campaigns to fight extreme poverty, helped found the Australian Youth Climate Coalition, helped found a campaign called Live Below the Line that encouraged people to live under the extreme poverty line for a few days just to understand and challenge themselves and raise awareness. And that campaign has gone on to raise more than $20 million over the over the following 10 years. All through that time, I kept grappling with this question of how do we really unlock the creativity, the leadership, the passion of people to make their communities better. And how do we do that at scale? How do we do that in a way which meets the moment of the challenges the world is facing? And that led me in 2011 to join this very small technology startup called change.org. Had a mission of empowering people to create the change they want to see. And over the following decade have helped grow change.org into more than a dozen countries, opened up our offices across Asia, Latin America, Europe, helped try and reinvent a kind of business model that would allow us to take social impact technology to scale. Grew the platform to have more than 400 million registered users, more than 70 million people use the site every month now. And a few years ago, I took over as CEO. And right now I'm focused on how we can use the incredible resources, technology, and reach of the Change.org platform to really power a new generation of civic and movement leaders with the money they need, with the resources and support they need, to not just make big impact, but to do that sustainably, to do that in a way which really allows for the type of durable, long-term, powerful, innovative change making that we need to address the challenges the world is facing today. I started out this journey in a rural part of Australia, and now I live in New York and have been here for 7 or 8 years and regularly able to spend time with some of the most incredible change makers and play some small role in helping accelerate their work. And all of it started with that very simple weekend away that helped transform what was this very general interest, general passion into something that was so much clearer, so much more meaningful, and that I had so much more commitment to. And it's still what guides me today. Thanks very much.
Thanks, Georg, and cheers for Nick Allardyce, a wonderful young man. I just wanted to take a moment, and I'd welcome a little chat with Jim and Ed about this, to just draw your attention to what I see as 4 key principles of the way that Osgreen works. The first thing is about we target this group we call innovators and early adopters. And how do I define them? They're the ones that show up. And the thing that's really, really important as part of that journey is setting them up with their own created, self-created visions and vibrant goals. Vibrant goals are the sorts of goals that will guide you for the rest of your life. And I really loved the way Nick talked about that. They're visionary, they're inspirational, they're beneficial to all beings. They're real because you can see yourself doing them. They're ambitious, they're necessary for these times, and they're transformative. And, having those really big picture ideas of where we need to go and feeling the call and the pull of that, of the earth calling us forward, is a key part of that. The other thing I wanted to draw attention to as well is that all the young people involved in Osgreen programs have elders walking beside them. It's not a case of set the youth free and they'll do it. We as adults have got responsibilities as well. And so we have systems of, aunties and uncles and elders that are just there on the sidelines, making sure that young people are supported. So thanks again, Jim. Wonderful to be introducing you to some of the wonderful young people that I've had the privilege to work with over the years. We were chatting about being seniors and still being at the coalface, so to speak, and wouldn't have it any other way.
Thank you so much, Sue, for you to be up in the wee hours as you have been for our program. Just it indicates the extraordinary fortitude you have and the dedication to this movement. And I think the point that you were just making is so seminal. It's not about just unleashing the youth. It's about walking beside them as we all work together. All the generations need to come together as one, and each of the generation has something to offer. Some have more energy if they're Gen Zs, and some have more wisdom, when they're in their 60s and 70s. and beyond. So I want to acknowledge all the work that you're doing, and thank you for bringing such extraordinary young people to our program on the COP. And we'll see you in a few days.
I just have one more thing I wanted to say, Jim,
Sure.
too. It's about trusting the young people. Well, it's about trusting everyone. You know, like once someone taps into that inner knowing of this is what I need to focus my energy on, they're away. And it's something that will carry you for the rest of your life. And it's about us trusting, you know, their hearts, that they're in the right place and doing what they need to be doing.
Yes.
So go well, and so glad to see you have Ed with you today. I will stick around for a little bit.
Okay. Thank you so much, Sue. As it turns out, everyone, the feed from Sharm el-Sheikh hasn't come through yet, so we may be interrupting the program over the next hour or so as Rhea Salter and her colleagues try to find good internet. That's the way things happen, as we saw yesterday from Sierra Leone. So we'll just keep everybody posted. And as you all know who've been watching Humanity Rising, we know that Zoom happens. And that's just the way it is in a interconnected, internet-driven world. I'd like to now introduce my good friend and colleague, Ed Muller. Most of you will know him. He's convened many sessions on Humanity Rising. And I want to just say about Ed, it was Ed Muller who came in and really early on in Humanity Rising said, this is no longer about sustainability, it's about regeneration. And that has been a seminal concept for Humanity Rising. And ever since then, regeneration has been the meta theme, I would say, for Humanity Rising. Because for humanity to rise, we need to regenerate not only the ecosystem, but human civilization itself. Ed is the founder and chief executive officer of the University of International Cooperation in Costa Rica, that has been a pioneer in ecological education and regeneration. He's worked globally in 35, 40 countries with projects on ecological restoration and regeneration. He's the founder of Regenerate Costa Rica. I don't know of anybody anywhere that's done more for the planet and for human renewal than Ed Muller. And so, Ed, it's been a real privilege to have you as a partner. And why don't we just start with any comments you want to make on the COP, and then talk about regeneration generally and regenerative agriculture, and then we'll have a dialogue toward the end. But welcome.
Thank you, Jim. It's a pleasure for me to be here. I kind of missed the last months where I haven't been able to be active in Humanity Rising. I just admire your sticking to it. 500 and some days already. That's a lot of work. But yeah, this is a lovely opportunity to actually share a few ideas. And in a short talk, you can actually only like bug people, bother people, pick them, and make things uneasy, so people start reflecting, start thinking. But I do want to share my screen, and just to, I'm more a visual person, and just to go with the ability to use the full senses to understand where we are at. So we are finally here, 27th COP, after 30 years of the convention. And I have a lot of friends that are linked to this COP. Costa Rica sent 40 people up to Egypt, and a lot of international friends who are doing amazing work trying to move things forward. My question is, after 30 years and over 300,000 participants in the COP, can we expect something different coming out of it? Or is it going to be another bunch of promises? And if we look at what has happened, the only times where we have reduced greenhouse gas emissions is when the Soviet Union fell apart, in 2008 with the financial crisis, and in COVID. But if you look at COVID, you can see how quickly we are getting back. And the international language of building back better, we shouldn't be building back. We should be bouncing beyond. We should be going to a new paradigm of development. Bouncing back is not going to save us. And we need to focus a lot on what the true objectives of what we have to do on a daily basis are. So which of these meetings with 300,000 people participating, and that's excluding the Rio 92, the Rio plus 20, now the Rio plus 30, we're 30 years after the Rio meeting, which of them made a difference? And this year we broke the records. We went above 420 parts per million of CO2. So again, and this is supposed to sound like something new, but if you look back, this has been the main focus of the other COPs, to have the ambitious goals and commitments and move them into practical action. Those last two words is what has been missing, and mainly because of the language that's used, because of the independence of countries in applying these things. It's very hard to force countries to actually do what they promise. And during these meetings, a lot of things have been promised. So we are at a moment where we have gone beyond limits that were established 30, 40 years ago as safe for humanity. And if we look at the key issues under discussion, we see again, oh, let's reduce the impact. Let's keep the rise of global temperature well below. What is well below? 1.5. 1.5. Look at what's happening with the 1.15 that we are now in average. Pakistan, Florida, British Columbia, all over the planet, Australia, we are already way above what we should be. And if we go to 1.5, and I don't think we would stop there if we just follow the convention process and the results that we have seen over the last few years, we're going to go way beyond the 2 degrees centigrade unless we do something different. And I know we need to learn how to live in a collapsing planet, and adaptation is something that is strongly focused on by the international cooperation, by World Bank, by the whole planet, political agendas in the different countries. But I'm not sure I'm going to stay sitting down in a chair and learning how to live in a planet that's collapsing, and I'm not willing to. And I'll talk a little bit about that. So do we need to lower emissions, or do we need to reverse the emissions, bring them back down, pull carbon from the sky, put it beneath our feet? Is lowering our emissions going to get us to anywhere? Basically, we're gonna disappear. And good luck with this. This is the novelty of this COP. Okay, finally, the big corporations, and Coca-Cola has been producing poison for over 100 years. It's one of the biggest plastic polluters. When you go to the beaches where I live, just down the road, what you find is Coca-Cola company bottles, plastic bottles and tops. That's about probably 60 or 70%. And they're always getting the prizes for corporate responsibility. How can you get a prize for corporate responsibility if you're actually poisoning people with sugar and with other stuff? I mean, and just the concept. So good luck with getting good results when you have the bad guys helping fund the process and influencing the decisions that come out of there. So my big question is, what are humanity's biggest challenges actually? Are they greenhouse gases? It's CO2? I see so much talk about reducing CO2 and the carbon markets and all this really nasty process globally of verifying, and where you get these bingos and private companies in charge of defining the carbon markets and how the money is going to be spent, how it's going to be certified. It's just so much money wasted, and we still haven't gotten to a decent balance. And again, is CO2, is carbon actually that important? If we look at the planetary boundaries, and this is the updated version from this year, both in January and in April, we got the green water limits. This defines our safe operating space. So we look at fertilizer use, biodiversity loss, novel entities, which is chemical pollution, plastic pollution, and green water, and land system change. Those limits are way beyond the safe operating space for humanity. That means we are leaving the planet early as a civilization because we have exceeded these planetary limits, the capacity of the planet to satisfy and to correct some of these damages. And climate change comes last. I'm not saying it's least important, but I'm saying, why don't we look at the other planetary changes which have low-hanging fruit that could actually lead us to important changes? So basically what the Anthropocene means is all global changes that we're looking at are caused by us. And again, the COP is focusing on climate change. And the CBD convention, basically those meetings, people don't even realize that they're happening every 2 years. And the desertification convention, those meetings are also happening. Nobody hears about them. The press is not interested in it. So this is what's moving the planet right now. And yes, I'm not saying plastic pollution is a big threat. It's recognized as one of the real big threats currently. But are we just recycling, clearing up the symptoms and not treating the cause? I think so. We're not actually looking at true solutions. We're looking at remedies. If we look back at the planetary boundaries in the previous edition in 2015, and the work done by Campbell and his team, basically global change can be attributed to agriculture. 80% of global change is due to agriculture. Only about 25–30% of climate change is due to agriculture. And there again is a misconception. So we're looking at the climate change process and we say, oh yeah, agriculture is responsible for 30%. And who do they blame? The cows that are farting, with a total reductionist approach. And I'll go a little bit more into detail there. So Antonio Guterres already said in the last year, in the last COP, that biodiversity loss is happening, it's collapsing our planet, and we are the losers. And it's all over the media, so nobody can say that they're not aware of the role of biodiversity in keeping us alive. And the Global Biodiversity Outlook, I was part of the Nagoya negotiations. I went as a country negotiator, and I was involved at that time with IUCN, with UNESCO, with all these organizations, and getting the Aichi targets approved, 20 simple targets for politicians to understand and corporations to understand. 10 years later, we just kicked the ball forward again, because none of the 193 countries that committed to these things even got to a decent, fair implementation of these agreements. So we're seeing a tremendous loss of habitat for nature. And if you look at what people are worried about, the announcement that we were losing 1 million species to extinction scared people. But the fact that Latin America has lost 94% of its abundance in biodiversity, and that is clear to me because when I was not even a kid, 20, 30 years ago, I got out of the city, and when I got back, I had to clean the windshield from all the insects that were splattered on that glass. And now that doesn't happen anymore. We don't see the light bugs at night. We don't see all these insects that I used to see, the butterflies. It's just the abundance is collapsing to a point that ecosystems are not able to function anymore. And before I had all my gray hair, I was already insisting that if we don't change the way we work to holistic approaches, we will not solve the biodiversity issue, the poverty issue, the climate change issues. So we need holistic approaches, and we need to focus on regeneration. I understand the paradigm now is restoration. We cannot restore. We need to move forward. We need to look for new balances in ecosystems, just so that they start functioning again and allowing nature to do its job in coming back. So yes, climate change is code red. It's exponential. It's extremely dangerous. So I'm not saying it's not important. We have seen record-breaking temperatures around the planet. We have seen 40 degrees centigrade above average traditional temperatures in Antarctica, and over 30 degrees centigrade increases during the same week in April this year in the Arctic. And we see all this news about catastrophic processes that are leading to accelerate the climate change. So our time is running out. And are we still going to wait to look for solutions at the political level, at the corporate level? Other issues are not even on the radar, like losing our land, losing our soils. So half our current population in the planet is already losing their well-being because of soil degradation. And this report, which is already 4 years old, really hasn't come out to the media. And we're looking at many billion people, and we're looking at a 6th mass extinction due to this. And we are still seeing universities push agrotoxic agriculture. I mean, how can these universities even have the moral standing to keep training people how to spray better, how to fertilize better? And if we keep on with this, we're going to release an equivalent to 1 year's planetary emissions just by further degradation due to our current agricultural practices. So this is a modern day map of soil destruction. It doesn't look good. And we are not focusing on this. This should be primary discussion at the COP in Egypt. This should be top of a discussion. In my area, we lose in Costa Rica up to 200 tons of topsoil per year. That's 25 dump trucks filled up with a tractor and dumped into the river, which end up killing our oceans every single year. That's 13 millimeters. It's unbelievable that we're not paying attention to these things. So we have all the science, we have all the information. We're going into a planetary extinction, and we know why. And every year we produce more data, more information, maybe some knowledge, but we have forgotten to turn that knowledge into wisdom. And we really are behind in turning that wisdom into action. And if you look at Wikipedia, I mean, the definition of wisdom is the ability to think and act using knowledge, experience, understanding, common sense. So this is not about statistical models. This is common sense, just looking around, seeing what's happening. I don't need more proof that we're going extinct. I don't need more science that we're going extinct. Keep on producing science, but we can make decisions now that can change our future. And we can build the future we want. So we're talking about ethics. We're talking about experience and self-knowledge. We're talking about working with all knowledge levels and turning this all into wisdom. But we have big challenges, and I've identified or reduced them to 5 big challenges, which I see along 28 years of being the president of the University for International Cooperation and trying to develop, actually I founded it after 2 years after Rio, to implement sustainability. And I just couldn't find people that could integrate economic society and nature into a process of real transdisciplinary work. So the challenge number 1 is it humans and nature, or is it humans are nature? We made a big mistake in environmental education when we told people that they had to take care of nature. Nature takes care of itself, and nature will get rid of us. So we should have taught people that if nature is not working, if ecosystems do not function, if biodiversity levels don't allow ecosystems to function, we are not here anymore on this planet. And that would have made a totally different power structure. And nature has given us so many warnings over the last decades with floods, with fires, with droughts. But it affected mostly vulnerable people. So if we look around now, I think nature gave us probably our last little present. It gave us something that we cannot even see that put everybody on their knees. Hollywood actors, presidents, all the way to refugees in Africa. Everybody on your knees for 2 years, a bit more, and think about what you're doing. But it didn't stay there. If we look back in 2020, during those 4 months vacation that we gave it when we were locked down, the skies cleared, nature cleared the skies. People in Beijing, people in Delhi realized that there were mountains around those cities which they hadn't seen in 40 years. The oceans came back to life. Here, our fish stock recovered extremely rapidly. All over the world, wildlife started taking its place. So basically, the message from nature is, look, I'm still here. I'm still resilient. I'm still willing to bounce back and help you guys if you let me. And we haven't learned that. Second challenge is the reductionist approach. Our Western educational system, our research system is biased. It's disciplinary. And we have the specialists who have lost the idea of how a system works, the understanding of a system. Our indigenous peoples, they look at a system by the interaction of the components. We instead try to dissect to death the components, literally, to be able to understand the system. But it's not the components, it's the energies, the flow between the components that make a system work. And this requires us to get a sledgehammer and throw down the walls between departments and universities, between different ministries. There cannot be a minister for environment and a minister for agriculture, which usually are basically enemies. We need one institution that looks at how land is being managed, how we're taking care. And when we have these reductionist approaches, we get detached solutions. I drive that car. It's electric. Yeah. In Costa Rica, 99% of our electricity is from renewable, not sustainable. Because dams are not sustainable, but renewable resources. So I agree that it's very nice to drive them. I don't think it's a solution. It's more cosmetic. If you take the whole life cycle with the batteries and everything, it's not really a solution. But our decarbonization strategy, which was launched in the last government, and I was part of the Scientific Council for Climate Change, and I resigned because of this process. Basically, they're betting on reducing emissions to save the country, to decarbonize the economy through electric mobility. I mean, that can be a solution for Norway, and I don't think Norway is now realizing that it really isn't a solution for them, but it's not a solution for a tropical country that doesn't have the resources and that should be looking at way different things for solving. And we still have information that if we get rid of cattle, we stop eating beef and we stop using dairy, we're going to save the planet. This is again a reductionist process, and it's still guiding the discussions. Challenge number 3, our changes are exponential, and we're not taught at the university or in schools to think exponentially. So things are growing very, very quickly. Biodiversity changes exponential, our collapse is exponential, and technology is exponential. It's getting a bit slower than the doubling every 18 months as we had in Moore's principle, but it's still very exponential, and it's changing things exponentially in the planet. And we'll see a lot more technology influencing even our own lifestyles. Challenge 4, we're still accepting wrong methods like GDP. And there's enough published already on GDP and how it's not a measure to measure development. And toxic agriculture, plowing, these things are still being taught in most modern universities. And there's a very ugly marriage between petrochemicals in these universities and the funding processes. and the lack of ethics to keep on promoting this type. And challenge 5, which is probably the most challenging one, is being able to unlearn. If we're not able to unlearn, and this is very difficult to work with adult professionals, they've been taught for 15 years at university, master's and PhD levels, wrong things, and it's hard for them to understand that they have to unlearn and start co-creating new solutions. So I use a lot the 3 horizons model from Tony and Bill. And we need to move away from this horizon 1, this current paradigm of business as usual, which is losing its fit for purpose. We need to look into there and see what's worth conserving. We cannot throw everything out, but we need to transition very quickly to a regenerative paradigm. And that's where the UCI University, which I run, is in a horizon 2. And I would say horizon 2+. It's an organization that's pulling from the past and moving into regeneration. And how do we do it? We try to demonstrate that regeneration works. And this is based on Bucky Fuller's idea of not fighting a system. We won't be able to change the current system. We just need to build a better one that will make the old one obsolete. And that is what my work is all about. So how do we show that regeneration is feasible economically, socially, and environmentally, culturally, spiritually, politically feasible? And I worked for many years trying to find a way to work holistically. And I came up with this diagram where we have Mother Earth is the basis for everything. So how ecosystems function, how we have functional landscapes and seascapes that provide the services to keep life on the planet. On the other side of the toroid is basically our mindfulness, ethics, the Earth Charter, values, compassion, understanding, that we need to change personally our inner self and collectivize that change at a community level to really rethink what our role is. So we need to move from the ego economy where man is on top, woman underneath, and life at our feet, transition through the eco economy. I don't consider that putting a price on nature is an ethical process. I would put value on nature, but not a price. So we need to transition through that eco model, and that's the life cycle, the green economy, all of these processes, which are actually fixing a little bit the damage, but not going to the root cause and not changing the principles that are generating this. And then we have regenerative economics, regenerative societies. Societies need to be active, and we saw that in yesterday's election. Finally, the youth are taking the role and becoming active again in politics and defining their future. We cannot leave the decisions in people with gray hair or orange hair, which are looking at their self instead of looking at the bigger picture. Regenerative politics, we need to bring these people, these young people into politics, into decision-making positions. And culture is so important. It's what glues us together as a community. It's what makes me different than people from China, from Japan, or from Europe. So we need to integrate this into a holistic approach. And if I had more time, I'd say how we're doing this. But basically, it's this holistic process where we recognize that the basis of everything is life. And for life to happen, we need function of all ecosystems at a landscape level. So we need to look at benefit for all life forms, not only human life forms. And we need to measure it differently. Instead of measuring with GDP, why don't we measure it with happiness? Why don't we measure it with hope? So instead of going to minimize impacts, which is the current sustainability model, we need to recover the capacity and increase the benefits for all life. So in order to demonstrate that this conceptual framework was usable and produce results, we started the Costa Rica Regenerativa initiative back in 2018. So our mission is, let's demonstrate that regeneration happens. And starting with the fact that we can identify, and we're using the country donut from the deal, the Donut Economics Action Lab, and Andrew, this was his work for his PhD, if I'm not mistaken. We can identify which are the biggest problems in Costa Rica. And we can see CO2 emissions very high, land use change, material footprint. I'm not going to start with material footprint, which is where everybody's focusing. That requires enormous institutional changes. But fertilizers, phosphorus, and nitrogen, we can get rid of them overnight. We don't need them. Reverting damaged land to nature, that's very easy. And it happens within 2 or 3 years already in a tropical country. And bringing down CO2 emissions, I'm not worried about reducing emissions from cars. I'm looking at how can we capture carbon from the sky and pull it and put it beneath our feet. So we need to know how to prioritize our actions in this holistic way, and not only CO2 and CO2 markets. And how do we move into a perfect donut for our country? Inequality is the result of growing GDP. Inequality is the result of neoliberal open markets. So inequality is our biggest social issue in the country. And this is before COVID. After COVID, it's even worse. So how do we reduce inequality? And that's again by bioregional development, local development, where we bring people into the economy. It's not only about nature and people, it's bringing people into playing a role in the economy and getting a share of it, and not only concentrating the benefits in the 1% or less than 1%. So one of the biggest issues, recognizing that agriculture is the biggest culprit of global collapse, well, it's the biggest solution. So we need to first understand it's not chemistry, it's biology. And if it were chemistry, why don't companies who are producing chemical food, toxic food, put a logo of certified chemical if it's so good? Why do the people who are doing it well with regeneration, with organic, have to pay all these fees? Another issue is we cannot depend only on the Western knowledge and thinking. This is Don Manuel Castellanos. He's a Lacandon Indian from southern Mexico. And his wisdom, in this image, you can see a degraded farm, which has been regenerated using his wisdom on the right and using a PhD student from a Western university on the left. Who knows how to bring nature back? Don Manuel Castellanos. And they have over 5% carbon up to 50 centimeters deep. And it smells delicious with all the mycelia that's growing there. You can see the white strands. So we need to incorporate all sorts of knowledge. We have a scientific background. Ratanlal is actually a conservative researcher, but very, very well recognized. And he said we can revert climate change just by managing soils. So why is it so difficult? Has it been so difficult to bring soil management into the convention process? In 2019, we had the pre-COP here, and we managed to do a side event on soil carbon. It was a success, but I'm not sure if we could actually penetrate the whole process, even if now we hear a bit more about these solutions, but we're still not looking at a big support. We're still looking at reducing emissions from cars and things like that. Jeff Moyer and his teams from Rodale Institute have gone even further. They say that if we convert existing cattle production to regenerative grazing systems, we can actually capture per year more carbon emissions than our whole global economy is producing. And if we add regenerative cropping, we can actually capture 150% of our emissions every year. This means that by 2030, we'd be under 400 parts per million. Zeth Itzkan, who yesterday arrived in Egypt, he has done a lot of work putting together information. And the carbon pump that a pasture is, if you do it correctly, could actually get us down to 350 parts per million in 30 years. So we have the solutions right beneath our feet. We have the solutions, and they're economic, they're social, they're environmental solutions coming together. So we need to focus now on landscapes, on bioregions. We need to use techniques that don't require external inputs, fertilizers, chemicals, whatever, and things accessible to farmers, to communities. Just as during COVID, we launched about 200 family farms, and we had over 500 families eating with community farms and other processes. So they were producing their own food. We were told you cannot produce vegetables in the climate in Guanacaste, where I live. We have 6 months drought and 6 months flood. And it's just that the soil has been degraded to such an extent, we managed to do it. We are educating youth in technical schools. We're bringing youth to technology. The girls, 15-year-old girls are flying drones to plan the agriculture that we need. And we're producing abundance. This is one of the community farms. I mean, it is abundant. It is lots of food produced without a single drop of chemical. The flavor, the nutritious value, and the ease of production, and not wasting 30 or 40% or 50% of your income with the increases in prices in fertilizers and chemicals. It just makes a big difference in the economic process. Resilience. This is during, we had 2 hurricanes in November 2020. These are family farms, flooded and still kept growing. So we know, using indigenous knowledge, that we can produce agriculture. We need more labor. Yes, we cannot put a 30-meter wide machine to do regenerative agriculture in these cases. But 3/4 of the food is produced by smaller producers anyway. And for a local development process, we don't need the big corporations. We don't need to import food, cheap food from the US or from Brazil or from Argentina. We need to provide food locally and not have the carbon footprint. So we have been able to convert this soil, and we're, as I mentioned, we were told we couldn't produce here. We just managed to produce abundance, up to 10 tons per month per hectare in that degraded soil, produced by farmers that didn't have experience. It's a learning process. So we work with schools, we work with campesinos. I already mentioned the technical schools. Here they are producing, farmers and our staff, repellents using Carolina peppers and garlic and other things. We have been able to show, and this is Mel Lander's pictures, how we can increase carbon very rapidly just using mulch. And it's all based on the mycelium. Fungi are the future, and they were the ones that managed to reduce our high CO2 levels up to 280 parts per million before the Industrial Revolution. And there's more and more information becoming available on this. It's magic. This internet of the soil is the future. And we just are not incorporating this into our teaching processes around the planet and our solution processes. Harvesting water, a critical issue. And we can do it very simply. Producing abundance, multi-cropping, food forests. And we know now that regenerative agriculture produces nutritious food, delicious food, a lot more nutritious than chemical food. The forest gardens, we're working with Mel, and there are lots of examples of permaculture projects around the world, but they're isolated. We need to bring them together. And we need to rescue all the biodiversity that we used to do for food. We have concentrated our food consumption on very few products, and we can now recover this genetic material. We need to get away from the certified seeds and go to seed networks and move away from being forced to buy from Monsanto the seeds. We need to bring back health. People have gotten used to eat junk food because it's cheap. So we actually have to teach our communities how to cook and use all these things that are too bitter for them at the beginning, which they don't know and they're afraid to consume. We produce 35 products in every farm simultaneously. And they say, we don't like the bitter stuff. But now, the last meeting I was with them in Christmas last year, the lead person said, we have learned to eat the bitter things because the skin of our kids turns shiny again. Then cattle. We launched a savory hub last year, if I'm not mistaken. And it's a business platform. So through business, we're actually providing solutions that will increase production, at the same time capture enormous amounts of carbon. So we're measuring carbon, we're increasing biodiversity. So actually we're calling it savory plus biodiversity. We're reducing the area necessary for cattle and giving it back to biological connectivity, biological corridors. And now I'm working with the Federation of Cattle Producers to go to 200,000 hectares over the next few years. So we can actually turn Costa Rica into carbon negative country just using cattle alone. So we don't need to get rid of beef. We need to actually manage our cows better. As Alan Savory says, a good friend, it's not the cow, it's the how. So what is biological connectivity? This is a typical plot, and one of our farms is right in the center of it. We need to identify where we can re-establish biological corridors. We probably need to enhance some of the plants that are not existent anymore, trees especially, but also shrubs, and we don't have native nurseries. So we need to establish nurseries and help communities develop nurseries that can then bring back native plants. At the urban level, we're working the same thing. We just need to get rid of the exotic plants and bring native plants to allow pollinators. So large scale monitoring with insects, with butterflies, with birds, with bats, measuring soil carbon, measuring other soil parameters, measuring ecosystem services, and seeing how we can actually increase water harvest. And how do we measure it? So we've developed with 7 Vortex, with Hugo, measuring patterns that allow people that are not literate to be able to understand what's happening at their farm with just one blink of the eye. So we have different indicators, and in red, they can see where they're laying back, where they have to concentrate. And in darker green, we don't have any blues yet in abundance, but darker green is already regenerative. And there we can see the progress we're going. So to add to the production of food, we have turned these degraded soils into a haven for biodiversity. We got now over 200 insect species back in every single farm. We have now populations 20 to 50% above insect populations that are found in protected areas in Costa Rica. So we're increasing insect diversity, and most of them are beneficial insects. And actually, we found now that the number starts declining a bit, but you get a balance. So you don't get the pests anymore. It just keeps a balance. So we are using less and less of our repellents. Bats, it's amazing. In the farms that we have seen that there's biodiversity still present by biological corridors or patches of forest, we found only 3% of vampire bats, which is our big problem for cattle producers. Whereas in those farms that didn't have any forest left, 72% of the bats that we captured were vampire bats. So there are all these collateral benefits which will help farmers move to regeneration. And now we're developing this global platform for regeneration. There's a lot of money coming up, but there are no portfolios for investing. So we need to go beyond the carbon funds and really do the MRV processes, and especially concentrate on biodiversity and how can we bring biodiversity back. Now, the big challenge is we get requests all the time for more and more help in Costa Rica and outside. We just don't have a pool of regenerators to go to. So we're now focusing our university, our full process into regeneration and creating what we call first responders for regeneration. With Ubiquity launched last year, the Masters in Regenerative Action. We have launched the second cohort of our certificate in regenerative entrepreneurship. And we have students in Ghana who are now transforming their villages into food forests to cool down the temperature and to provide food, free food for all villagers. So it just starts spreading out, and through a network of mentors, through people like Melina, who have brought the biomimicry principles into our regenerative processes so we can really understand how nature works and how to find solutions. It's just amazing the progress we're making. And we just need to now work at a global level. So we have these online programs that are theoretical, let's say, or theoretical practical. But then we have a whole network that we launched with global regenerative communities and other communities. We just finished a summit the last 2 weeks where more people are joining the effort. So it's not about one network. It's about many networks where students can go and find mentors and find projects on the ground to do regeneration. And we hope to be able to fund some of these projects like our friend from Ghana. And all of this will be registered in a new system. We don't want a degree hanging on the wall at the end. We want a passport that will register, of course, is a blockchain passport that will register the accomplishments, the networking process of every student. And we launched in last COP, the Global Regeneration Corp, which allows us, it's like a graphic LinkedIn where we can actually contact people around the planet, see what they can offer, see what they're needing, see how we can work together, who is working on these regenerative projects around the planet, and start co-creating solutions, bringing academic programs, bringing academic providers, and bringing people on the ground that are doing regeneration. So the question is my 10-year-old son prepared for the future that's already here? I don't think so. So we really need to reshape, reinvent education. Thank you.
Ed, thank you so much. That was very powerful. And I thank you for it. I'd like to welcome Tamsin Woolley Barker, who's been co-moderating the COP program with me over the last several days. And Tamsin, why don't you come on in and interact with Ed? Tamsin, as you all know, is an evolutionary anthropologist, wrote a book called Teaming. And I'm sure she's been enthusiastically listening to everything that you've been saying. So welcome, Tamsin.
Oh, thank you, Jim. Ed, that was so great. And I just love hearing your summary and pulling all this together. It's such important work. And I just love that you're, working with Melina and Ugo. It's such great work. I found so much interesting stuff in this. Just, just looking at the 80% of global change and switching from this pure carbon model and these carbon benefits, we have so much focus on these numbers and metrics. So to see you bringing this really systemic approach that is just really from the bottom up, I mean, soil, it's such common sense, but to see the numbers and to see the systems that way and to feel the momentum for actual change that we can actually do something about on the ground is really inspiring. So I really thank you for that. I mean, for myself, I've come to that kind of thinking as well, that biodiversity and life is the solution. All these high level ideas, build a umbrella around the earth, crazy stuff, but when we have the solutions right within us, But what really stood out to me is your number one challenge, the apartness and the mentality. And I mean, it really starts with a shift of mind. I mean, we can bring in the structural change and the process change, and we can do that. And like you say, you're making a business case, with the vampire bats, and people start to see, the benefits in that way. But this kind of apartness, even stewardship kind of mentality that we bring, I don't think we can get there. We're not stewards, it's our body. So I think that's a fundamental shift that drives all of this. So it's just really inspiring to see you bring it together in that systemic way. And I hope, the big guys at COP27 are listening, because this is way more inspiring and actionable to me. Thank you.
Yeah, good to see you, Tamsin. It's been a while since we haven't been talking.
Yeah.
And I know you've done also wonderful work in this. That's why the spiritual dimension is so common. And I brought in, when I founded the university, we had 3 circles: economy, society, and environment. And we said that overlap, that little triangle in the center, was where sustainable development was supposed to happen. But early on, already in 1996, I included the culture, the politics, and the spirituality. And when I was in meetings with other university presidents, especially the bigger, most important universities and the classical definition, they actually laughed at the beginning about the spiritual dimension. And when they saw I was serious, and they start, mocking me and saying, well, how do you teach spirituality? And I said, you don't really teach it. It's a process with everything you're doing in your programs. And then they said, well, how do you measure the learning of spirituality? I mean, this was the president of a very famous US university. I went there to sign an agreement with them. I left without signing the agreement. I said, I cannot sign an agreement. Actually, the dean of the School of Agriculture picked me up in a V12 pickup in a flat country. You had a ladder to get, I would get out of the airport. I had to climb a ladder to get into this truck. And that mentality is still there. So we cannot fight that system. I won't change. I was sitting at dinner that night, and Condoleezza Rice was on the table. And she started out saying, we didn't have proof, but they would have gotten the technology anyway. That's how the dinner started. And on the right side, I had the owner of the biggest insurance company in agriculture in the southern United States. And he didn't believe in climate change. And I said, this is not where we want to collaborate with. So I finally realized in 2015, after being involved at CBD COP, at the Climate Change COP, at the UICN as a vice chair, at the UNESCO International Advisory Committee for the MAP program and so on, I said, this is not going to solve it. And I decided to move away and resign to all these positions and said, we're not going to get there. We need to start showing that regeneration is actually happening, growing it at by a regional level. And that's all my work. So we were told by big universities, you cannot produce food there. We did it. And we did it without chemicals, and now people are happy. We started with changing farmers in a farming community, the only farming community in Guanacaste because it's higher elevation. And the farmers didn't want to move away from chemistry. So we got their kids at the high school and then started transforming them. And they asked for their parents to give them 1,000 square meters in their farm. 6 months later, the parents were looking over the fence and saying, oh gosh, do you think we can increase what you're doing to the rest of the farm? So it's just demonstrating that it's possible. And with cattle, if we get these 200,000 hectares, and I'm almost sure we're going to get them because this is moving very quickly, we can actually look at such a dramatic change in the carbon budget and redo our decarbonization strategy for the country and for other countries. If we shift Brazil's cattle industry into capturing carbon and regenerating biodiversity, we have impacted more than the reduction of emissions of countries like any European country. So we just need to shift and unlearn.
Yeah, no, that's absolutely right. And a lot of, I come from this scientific background, and I'm always coming up against that reductionism. And, it always comes back to, well, can you measure it? Or, is that empirically true? And then, you go back to Elinor Ostrom's work, and it's, if the tragedy of commons, we see people cooperating all the time. So, if the theory is wrong, if it works in practice, the theory is wrong, right? So that you're just demonstrating that it actually works on the ground.
And sadly enough, our research has turned into a statistical analysis. And
Right.
we've lost common sense. And peer-reviewed journals are reductionist. So you can't really make an academic career in a traditional university by working holistically. And so I've said no to Springer. I've said no. I just said no last week again. I'm not going to pay $1,500 to get something published in a book that you have to pay, $40 just to look at a page for 24 hours. That is not what I'm focusing on anymore. And go ahead, keep on doing that science, but we have enough knowledge and enough data to know why we're going extinct. And we know why already. We just have to open our minds and start working on it all over the planet. But it's hard to get funding for these initiatives. I mean, we launched the Regenerative, the First Responders Program in last COP. And after 4 months of battling and bringing, scraping the pots to see where we could get resources to get it launched, Jim and I kind of said, okay, let's just put it on hold. Now we're relaunching it because it's just one of the only strategies I have to actually get hundreds of thousands of young people understanding what are their priorities and how they can define them, and working together to co-create solutions. We don't need the big experts.
No. We
need local people that are understanding what's happening and can try. And if we fail, but we learn in the process. I don't need 100% proven, 99.9% statistical analysis to know that we're going to die. And I don't need that same percentage to know how we can bring carbon under our feet, even though my partners at the scientific advisory council for climate change in the last government, where I resigned with that strategy to decarbonize, they said carbon in the soil is too variable. So we just launched, I can't say too much, there's an NDA, but we just launched sensors that will allow us to measure soil metabolism.
Wow.
We can measure it every minute, but if we measure every 3-4 days, we'll understand how soil brings life back, how living soil will work in curing climate change. It's not reducing the impact, it's actually reverting climate change. And we can do it in a decade if we get enough people involved to change the way we produce our food.
Yeah, I mean, two things come to my mind. It's like the kids are so despairing, And because they are being forced to rely on these big solutions over there, but it's like, we can just go to work where we are, and we have to. And what if we accidentally make our lives better, and we accidentally generate communities that are resilient?
Hope. Kids need hope.
Yeah.
And we don't have to learn how to live in a collapsing planet. We still have time to rebuild a planet of abundance. Just moving away from the economic model, moving away from loans and banks and fiat money, moving away from governments, national governments, and making local governments stronger. So one of our big projects is actually at the municipal level. We're working with local governments. We managed to increase tax revenue by 100% in one of the municipalities, and 40%, they have committed to investing 40% of that new revenue into regenerative projects within the city.
Beautiful.
So it's happening.
Yes.
We just need to scale it.
And I think what we really need is they say that, oh, there's not enough land to take care of nature and people and agriculture and carbon plantations. It's one thing, it's one planet, it's one body. But the other thing is we say there's not enough money. And so this is just we need to restructure. We need to take that money at the top and that land at the top and put it back into the ground roots.
We are the cattle farmers. We already have 12 farms under our management. And one of the farms went from 50 to 500 cows in less area. So we're giving between 5 and 30% of every farm back to biological corridors.
Beautiful. And
making money for the farmers. Which farmer, and reducing their imports. They don't have to buy fertilizer. They don't have to buy pesticides. All they need to is invest in electric fencing and water. And we're doing water harvesting. So we're actually going to bring the rivers in my area where I'm living now, which when I was a kid, still were flowing during the dry period, and now they're dry. We are going to get those rivers flowing again in this decade.
Beautiful.
In this decade. And we have one place where they started regenerating maybe 20 years ago, and their river flows every single day of the year. So we already have proof that this can happen. All we need to do is tell the story. So we need storytellers. If anybody's listening and is willing to provide storytelling, I'll give you all the information for you to tell the stories correctly.
Oh, that's a good call to action.
It is. We need action.
Yeah. And I love that, what you're saying is that we have all the answers within us. Like when you provide these corridors, when you just enhance these things that are already happening and already there, it goes by itself. I
mean, seeing a community farm that after 6 months has 50% more insects flying than protected areas in the country. And that goes against all principles of agriculture where you don't want a single insect flying there.
Yeah, so, keep it clean.
So we are actually, making miracles happen. And it's not us, it's nature that is helping us. We're just giving it a chance.
Mm-hmm. I really love this work. Thank you.
Ed, I'd like to just have you also comment on what I think is the Copernican revolution that you're articulating. And I think I'd like to have Ed talk about it, because what we're seeing at the COP, as you pointed out, is really a focus on one indicator, CO2 in the atmosphere. And all the governments are putting all their attention on something, and they're not even dealing with that. And what you're really saying is that the solution is the other way around, that it is not CO2, it's not climate change, it's all the different domains of humanity's relationship with the larger ecology, that if we would just work on those systematically, like regenerative agriculture, we would solve the climate change. So that in some ways, the CO2 is a symptom, not a cause.
Yeah, exactly.
Right? And say more about that, because that is a fundamental realignment for most people, I would say, in the environmental movement. Most of us have been caught up in if we go past 1.5 degrees centigrade, then we're toast. If we go past 400 degrees ppm, et cetera. So say more about that, because that's really the spiritual aspect, because it's about consciousness. and a reordering of not only priorities, but the way we actually view the global warming, climate change phenomenon, right?
You know, this goes back to when I was a young guy doing my master's program in a very famous research and training center here in Costa Rica, in Turrialba, Calcati. And we were working with Odom's principles on ecology and applying them to farms. And we needed to run some simulations, and we asked for a small computer. And the center said, no, your systems thing is not something that will be in the future, and we're not going to fund you the $15,000 to get a computer to do your simulations. This was back in 1980. And since then, I've been fighting. I mean, when I got to my statistical courses in all my degree programs, and I started hearing, yeah, you need to identify one hypothesis, one question, and look for one answer. I got so upset with my teachers. And I said, there's never one answer. There's never one question. And if we are not able to look at multiple questions and look at integrated answers, we will not solve this. So the cause of this is the reductionist approach, the disciplinary approach. And the person who designed our decarbonization strategy is an economist. So of course she does numbers. And economists go to the cows and measure how much they fart. Actually, they're burping, not farting. And measure that and multiply by the number of cows and say methane, and this is it. Well, there's more methane being leaked out of the permafrost melting, and nobody's talking to that. And that methane is heating up the planet 86 times faster than CO2. So we're exponentially making the Arctic hotter every year. And unless we bring carbon down, so it's not limiting to 1.5 or 2, it's bringing carbon down. We cannot keep on expecting to increase carbon to 450 parts per million. This will go way out of control. And we talked last year about the Arctic News article, which was published and then retracted in many journals, where human extinction starts in 2026. And it could very possibly be because of these exponential changes. So we need to quickly start moving, and that's a process of unlearning. That's why I say it's the biggest challenge. I still hear Christiana Figueres, she's a wonderful person. She managed to get the Paris Agreement, but she still says that we need to get rid of cattle and we need to start eating beef. So they're not willing to look at any other thing than what their mindset has been focused on for the last 30 years. And that's why we need to bring people in. That's why we need to bring youth in. It's easier to work with kids that have not been badly taught at universities than to get people that are being up to their PhD taught wrong things and believing wrong things. So I really bet on giving youth, and I don't care if they're gone to university. As long as they have empathy and they have hope and they have the energy to start co-creating solutions, we can see we bring the principles to these local communities who have no scholarity. They didn't even finish the primary school. And they start bringing up solutions just by understanding, oh, nature, yeah, how does nature work? And Melina has been crucial in bringing all these biomimicry principles, functional biomimicry, into our thinking of regeneration. But you explain this to people and they say, oh, that's true. When I was a kid. So we need to go back a little bit out of this modern academy, which ranks universities by, how many full-time teachers they have and what type of restaurant they have and how many peer-reviewed articles they're publishing, to actually start measuring their impact. And I would like to see big universities, and I won't mention names, will still be ranking #1 in them changing the planet positively, because many of them are the culprits of why our politicians that studied in those famous programs are doing so much harm, because they were taught to compete. They weren't taught to collaborate. They were taught to smash the competition, not to work together and give the hands and look for community processes, look for joint collaboration where money is not relevant. It's the future, it's life. We should have life as a viable currency.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. For sure. I'd like to underscore and have you say more about the youth because, as I mentioned earlier in the program, it turns out, or they're beginning to say, the election was only yesterday, that what saved the republic this time from a real rise of real authoritarianism was the vote of the Gen Zs.
Yeah.
And last week we had a 5-day program on Iran, and Iran is the only example in modern history where young people, in this case, young women, have catalyzed a revolutionary moment. And so you're absolutely right, and would love to have you say more on your vision of the Global Regeneration Corps, because it's turning out that they haven't learned yet, and therefore are in that state of primordial innocence, and therefore a possibility of a whole new paradigm, even if it's in a repressive regime like in Iran, or even if it's in a place like the United States where we're bombarded day in and day out with commercials and all kinds of false news and ideologies, and yet somehow they're ferreting their way through with a wisdom that is way beyond their years. And so that's an important, I think, new ingredient in the overall equation.
I just saw this morning that Meta is firing 15,000 people. That's youth leaving the platform very quickly because of the misinformation. So when I was traveling around the world giving conferences, there were years where I traveled over 300 days. And there were years where I gave more than 80 international conferences in different countries. We had to fly there on a plane. And I did a lot of stuff, all of this free of charge with youth. And I'd go to universities. And I remember I was working with the Congress in Tucumán, which is a province north of Argentina. We saved 500,000 hectares of primary forest that will not be converted into soybean production just by working with that Congress. But one day, the Congress people said, we have schools here. Would you like to talk to them? And they let me out late. So I got to a place where in a soccer field, plain sunlight, 35 degrees centigrade, I had 1,500 kids sitting on the lawn in full sunshine. Some of them were under a tent. And they gave me a microphone. I had actually prepared a PowerPoint in kids' language and stuff like that. And I got to this open space. They gave me a microphone and said, go ahead. So the first thing I did was ask those kids, who of you want to get involved in politics? One girl raised the arm. The rest went, oh. So I started talking to them and telling them about the future and telling what they could do. Halfway through, I asked, 30 kids raised their hand. When I closed the session, they actually moved me to a big gym, and about 80 kids came saying they wanted to help to become politicians. And a few months later, I started getting Facebook requests. At that time, my Facebook was pretty much private, and that led me to opening it up to the public. And two of the girls that were sitting in there sent me pictures of them, 19 years old, taking position in the city council, in the provincial council, and saying, thanks to you that encouraged me to get into politics, I am now making decisions for my province. So it can happen. They just need to understand their power.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And that they have to commit, that they cannot leave the future. If they leave it to guys like you and me with white hair in general, and I'm not criticizing neither you or me, but we already mortgaged their future.
Yeah.
We use that money already. We use those resources already. So they don't have much hope. But if we give them hope and say, look, we can co-create the solutions together and we can build abundance. Nature is about abundance. You don't see that a forest or a wetland needs fertilizers and pesticides to grow abundantly, nor does agriculture. So if we know it can go to abundance, we need bioregional focus. So we need people that live in a territory that are worried for the territory. We don't need a president like ours now, who came from a World Bank that destroyed Indonesia. And that is our current president. And our Minister of Environment in Egypt said, Costa Rica will not lead anymore the eliminating oil and gas at the global level. We, together with Denmark, last year, or last COP, we actually agreed to lead this initiative. This guy pulled it out. He was a candidate as a vice president for the extreme right-wing party. So even a country that has a tradition, that has an institutional background, can be damaged by these forces that you called. And it's amazing how much damage and how quickly that damage can happen, because people are not active. They say, oh yeah, oh my God, this is horrible, but I don't take any action. We can get rid of these people very quickly in the next election, you know, very, very quickly, if we get the youth involved. This guy won with 11% of the votes. That's all. And 60-some% of the kids didn't go vote. So it's in their hands, and that is all over the world, and especially in Latin America. Elections could be flipped over, and we're seeing Colombia, we're seeing Chile. Finally, some countries are waking up, and they're not going to be Venezuela. But yeah, we need to really work with them. And so being able to have a network of teachers, and that's what this is all about. We don't want all of courses to be UCI courses or all the teachers be UCI. We don't have enough stuff. We're a small university. We need people who want to upload courses. They'll get a share. The system will give them a certain percentage. We need to decide on those percentages. A small percentage for the platform, a small percentage to keep the academic part behind the mentoring and the aligning the courses that they agree on the skills and the competencies that are required. But then we can actually offer a global network of mentors and teachers, accessible at low cost, hopefully even free if we get funding, for anybody in the world to tap into it. And hopefully you have more than English and Spanish, Portuguese, Arabic, and other languages in the future, coming in to learn together. And we have the top people. I mean, we can bring in really top people, like in the MRA, you know, Kate Rayworth and other people with that level, bringing their knowledge, their wisdom, making it available at low cost. And then have a network of bioregions that are collaborating, where these students can land, they can parachute into these. And what we talked last time, if we could get funding, $5,000 to $10,000 for these students to actually make their projects happen. Like this guy in this village in Congo, no, in Gabon. If he can make a food forest in his village, can you imagine the impact of that? Just lowering the temperatures in his village, bringing water back, and providing free food for everybody. You solve poverty. And you get the kids engaged in growing their own trees and growing their own, you know, transforming their gardens into real nature places. So we can do it. And that's why we want to relaunch GRC next week and start collecting people. We can start collecting people, you know, that are willing to co-create solutions. And I don't need to wait for anybody's permission. This is in spite of government. This is in spite of the UN.
That's
this
key.
Is in spite of corporate.
Yeah, I always say, don't ask for permission, ask for forgiveness. And we can all just go to work right now. I mean, it doesn't take much.
No.
Well, Ed, thank you so much. This has been really powerful, because I think where you're putting all of us is in the middle of a Copernican revolution, to start from the bottom up and to do it ourselves at the local level in collaboration with other groups that are similarly concerned. And I know, Tamsin, that's at the heart of teaming. That's at the heart of being a superorganism. And as you pointed out on Monday, Ed, all strength to you, and let's talk soon, and would love to have you work with us. Maybe you and Tamsin could put together a whole program on regenerative superorganisms.
Let's do it.
Because that's the wave of the future. And I'm so heartened that the Gen Zs had saved the election in the US, and the Gen Zs are uniting revolution in Iran. And the young people that you're working with, they're carrying an impulse that I believe is historically relevant, and if activated, could save us from ourselves.
I agree. Let's do it.
Let's
Let's
do
do
it.
it. Thank you, Ed. Thank you,
Thank you.
Tamsin. That'll
you.
do it for us for today, everyone. You're all welcome to the after session chat group. You'll see the link in the chat that Stan has just put in, and we'll see you tomorrow for day 4 of our 10-day program. And tomorrow we're going to have Vandana Shiva from India to talk to us about her view of the COP and what we need to do to secure the human future. Thank you, everyone.
Thank
Bye
you.
for